Hey there, this is Gary with Roll With Us DMs. Skill challenges are an integral part of DC20. I recently did a video that included how to run and or play through a skill challenge. That video ran a little long and covered several topics, so I wanted to provide an abbreviated version of that video that will take you right into skill challenges. I hope this video helps you in your next skill challenge. Leave your skill challenge stories in the comments below. The first kind of skill challenge we're going to talk about are social skill challenges. All skill challenges have a challenge DC, in this case it was 12, and a number of success points needed, usually equal to the number of player characters, but you could set the number of success points equal to the player characters minus 1 if it's an easier challenge. You could make it equal to the number of players plus 1 or plus 2, depending on how difficult the challenge is. And then once you have a DC and a number of success points that are needed, the next thing is to decide what happens on a success and on each 5 that the player characters succeed by. In the case of this social skill challenge, the party gained 1 success point plus an additional success point for each 5 that they beat the DC by, plus an additional success point on a critical success. On a failure, they received no success points, and on a critical failure, they would lose 1 success point. So once you have the DCs and the number of success points needed to succeed, then once you have your success metrics, your failure metrics, and your critical failure metrics, then you need to come up with a resolution. So in this scenario, the resolution was when the challenge was over, the party would receive the following based on the number of success points that they'd earned. If they succeeded, so let's say you had a party of 4 players, they would need 4 success points. With the DC of 12, you would tally up how many success points they got, and if they succeed, they get a number of healing potions equal to the number of players. Each additional success in this scenario gave them an additional either invisibility potion, a silence trap, or an additional healing potion. And on a failure, they would get a number of healing potions equal to half the number of player characters. The interesting thing with skill challenges is you want to make them so that the players fail forward. If they do fail, you want them to fail in a way that still progresses the story forward. And that's why even if they fail in this scenario, they receive a number of healing potions equal to half the number of player characters. Also important to note that in DC20 you always round up. So if you had 3 players, they would still get at least 2 healing potions out of this social skill challenge. I will give a shout out to the dungeon coach, as this social skill challenge comes straight out of the Hunted one-shot. But I couldn't think of any better way to first introduce everyone to what a skill challenge is and how you would build your own without first looking at one that was created by the creator of the game, and it is the backbone of any skill challenge that you would make or choose to run. So this is our social skill challenge. Now, let's take a look at a combat skill challenge. So combat skill challenge, as we see here, it has many of the same characteristics as the social skill challenge. We still have a challenge DC. We still have a number of success points. These are unchanged in the Hunted. It is still 12 for the DC, and the success points are equal to the number of player characters. Just like in the social skill challenge, you are setting rules for what happens on successes in each by 5, and what happens on a failure in each by 5, as well as a critical failure. You'll note that they've added the critical failure underneath the failure rather than having it be its own tab and I think it's because it kind of builds on what was already there. So, on a success and each by 5, the party gains 1 success point, plus an additional success on a critical. For a failure and each by 5, the player character who failed takes 1 true damage and an additional 1 damage on a critical failure. So, what this looks like is the DC is 12. So, if a player character fails, they get, like, let's say a 10, they're going to take 1 point of damage. If they fail by 5 or more, so let's say they got a 7, they would end up with 2 damage. And then if they critically failed, see, I don't think that you could end up with 10 less. You would need a 2, and getting a 2, I don't think is really possible unless you picked a really bad skill, and I don't know any player that would do that. But if you did critically fail, and odds are if you critically failed, you would probably end up with a 5, you would take 1 true damage for failing, 1 true damage for failing by 5, and 1 true damage for critically failing. So 3 damage there. And then you have to look at the resolution, which in this case, when the challenge is over, the result is calculated based on the number of success points that they've earned. On a success, the players take no additional damage. On a failure, each player character who failed their check takes 1 additional true damage. So in the case where the player team failed, which would mean that they didn't earn, let's say there was 4 players, they didn't earn the 4 success points that were needed, and one of them critically failed, let's say, that player that critically failed, again, already took 3 damage, and then they're going to take another point of damage here. That's a significant amount of damage in DC20, which could have a player character very easily either bloodied, or you might be even well bloodied, depending on how high your might is. If you're a martial character, Marshall's gaining an extra bonus hit point at level 1, and then of course you gain 1 extra hit point for each point of might that you have. But if you were, say, a spellcaster and you only had +1 might, you would likely only have 7 hit points. And 4 hit points, you're going to be at 3 at the end of this combat challenge, should you critically fail and the party fail. Before I change the map, I'm going to give a real world example from the last time that I ran the Hunted. So we did this combat skill challenge, and there was a monk player. He wanted to run underneath the monster and attempt to grapple it. So he was going to make a grapple check, and I think he just failed by 5. Yeah, he fell by 5. So he took 2 points of damage. I had another player who he wanted to use awareness to track the creature and kind of point out its movements to the other players. So he did really well with his check. And then there was 2 spellcasters, and they both wanted to cast spells at the target, at the creature. So the one player did really well with his spell check, and the other one failed their spell check. They just failed it, not like the monk character who failed by 5 or more. So the player who failed their spell check, I had to kind of figure out, okay, how did they take damage, and what does this scene look like? So I knew that the monk was going to run underneath the creature and try to grab it. I knew that the 2 spellcasters were going to attempt to cast spells at it, and I knew that the other guy was kind of trying to track their movements. So once I had what everybody was going to do, I had them all roll, and then I had to kind of build out that scene. What does it look like? So I had the monk first in the scene run underneath this creature, and as he was running underneath it, I had the creature drop down on top of him, and like he kind of ducked and rolled, and he got scuffed up on the ground. That's how I flavored the 2 points of damage that he was taking during the challenge. I had the one guy tracking the creature and pointing out to the two spellcasters, okay, it's going over there, it's going over there. When it came time for the spellcasters, I had the creature jump at them, and while in the air, have the one player cast his spell and he failed. The creature was just about to land on top of this spellcaster, but then the other spellcaster's holy bolt flew out, hit the creature, and knocked it to the side. While the creature didn't land on top of our druid, he did end up getting kicked as the creature got thrown to the side and taking his 1 point of damage. So, the point of skill challenges and why they're so cool for me as a game master is you are cooperatively telling a story without the minutia of rolling for initiative and going round by round through something. So the first thing that you want to do when coming up with a skill challenge, of course, set a DC, set a number of success points, and then come up with the rules as far as what happens if they succeed or if they fail. Come up with a resolution of what happens. And then when it comes time to run the skill challenge, the first thing that I like to do is to go around the table and find out what everybody wants to do to contribute to the skill challenge. I don't have anybody roll yet because sometimes somebody might want to help, or I don't know the best order to story tell to build out the scene. So I wait to see what the players wanted to do. So I'll give you another real world example from that same game. In the social skill challenge, the one player, this was the fighter, he wanted to intimidate the one guard. So he wanted to intimidate. The cleric wanted to cast guidance on the person doing the intimidating, so that would add a d8 help die. So the same as taking the help action, just reflavored as guidance. The druid wanted to use their druid domain and then cast crackling lightning from the druid domain, striking the 3 training dummies that were in a line. And the monk in the party wanted to be launched in the air by the druid domain and flip kick all of the training dummies immediately after the lightning struck. So I gathered what everybody wanted to do, and then I had to piece it together in my mind what makes the most sense. I saw the intimidation happening first. So I had the cleric cast guidance, and I said, fighter, you feel a holy presence come over you. Go ahead and make your intimidation check. So, of course, then the cleric's rolling the d8 to add the help, and then the fighter makes his roll, and he did really well. Between them, they got enough successes to carry the party, because what ended up happening is the druid then, using their druid domain, they sent out like domain spaces, and then lightning arcing off of the last space, trying to strike the training dummies. So, okay, druid, make a spell check, and the druid actually failed their spell check. So I said the lightning fails to manifest. Monk, you get flung into the air. What do you do? Now make your attack check, or an acrobatics check if you want to do it with some flair. So he made an acrobatics check. He ended up with a 2 on his roll, and it was a failure. So he was going to fall, but then to flavor the scene a little bit more, I was like, okay, give me one more acrobatics check. You did fail, but do you land on your feet? You're a monk. Let's give you at least the opportunity to kind of reclaim a little bit here. So he fails to impress the person that he was trying to impress, but lands on his feet. And the challenge was still carried by the guidance from the cleric and the intimidation check from the fighter. So it built out a really cool scene, and I hope that that kind of helped you to see that. But another real world one that I can give you with actual map is this one here. So a little bit of a peek behind my screen. You can see I have initiative DC19, and I have that in the Game Master layer, in the GM layer, so that only I can see that. The players won't know what that is. But essentially, wherever there's a combat, I put an initiative DC in the GM layer so that I have those notes. But when the players came upon these goblins, rather than attempting to fight them, they wanted to intimidate them. I guess I should have prefaced with spoilers. So I really haven't said anything too spoilery yet, but spoilers. Lost Mines of Phandelver. If you haven't played it, you want to play it, maybe switch off, come back after I'm done with this section. But spoiler warning done. The player characters had just killed the bugbear Clark, who is the leader of the cave. They had his crown, and the goblin boss, he said that if they wanted their friend Sildar alive, they should kill Clark, and then he would let Sildar go. Of course, he was going to extort them for more money anyway, but the players wanted to attempt to intimidate the goblins. I thought that because they had killed Clark, they had killed the boss, the biggest monster in here, they had proof of it, I would not only allow it, but I would lower the DC from what I had initially thought it would be. I set a DC of 14. Usually, Dungeon Coach says that it's like 5 less than the initiative DC, and 14 seemed pretty good. I would have gone with a much higher DC than 14 if it wasn't for the fact that they had proof of having killed the most dangerous thing in here. They were outnumbered 6-4, so the goblins still had quite a bit of resolve. But what ends up happening is Demetrius, our gnome, he makes the intimidation check, and the 3 other player characters chose to help. So I remember Dorval in the back here was like banging on his shield, and the others were shouting things. So they each rolled their D8 help die, and then Demetrius rolled their intimidation. And the total that they got was 31. If you guys watched the video about the help action, this is the scene that I was describing there. But essentially, DC 14. So by Demetrius succeeding, and well, the grand total being 31, you had the one success at 14, another success at 19, another success at 24, and the 4th success needed was 29, and they had 31, so they succeed. So what happened was I had the goblins intimidated. They decided to parlay with the party, and it was an interesting conclusion here. I won't bore you too much with those details, but I will say that I needed to have repercussions. What would have happened had they failed? So I'm going to transition us back to the library again quick so that we can look at a combat skill challenge, and then I'll explain what I would have done had they failed. So I already told you the challenge DC was 14. The success points that they needed was equal to the number of players, and each success, and by 5, was worth an additional point. If they had failed, each player who failed would have taken a point of damage, and if the party failed, not only would they have not intimidated the goblins, which would have led to an encounter, but each player who failed would have taken an additional point of damage. So I would have flavored that as any player who failed would have had spears chucked at them, and they would have taken a point of damage, 2 points of damage, whatever it was that it would have made sense. And then I would have rolled for initiative, and then the players would have been in a little bit of a hole because they would have been going into this encounter injured, but they would have still been able to resolve the scene. It would have actually turned to combat. So my suggestion to anybody who is looking to run DC20, especially if you're running some homebrew, is if the players come up with something creative that they want to do, try running it as a skill challenge. Social if it's a social situation, combat if it's either a combat or if it has the potential to break out into combat. There was another scenario. It was actually in a 5th edition game, but I ran as a combat skill challenge because there were a couple enemies, but they weren't any real threat. They weren't going to beat the players. The question was, how much damage were they going to deal to the players? And it worked out very well. It sped things up. We didn't have to, roll for initiative and then run through like half an hour of combat. We were able to resolve it in 10 minutes or so and continue the story. So I would definitely recommend try to use skill challenges. Just remember, you need to do the 3 things. You need to set the DC and the number of success points needed. You need to come up with the rules as to what happens if somebody succeeds or fails and what happens on each 5, also on critical successes and critical failures, and then come up with the resolution, what happens based on if the players as a group succeed or fail. One final point on skill challenges and why I really like them in DC20 versus the way that skill checks are handled in other games is DC20 fosters an environment of creativity and teamwork that you don't see in other systems when you have a skill check. Instead of everybody making their own individual skill checks, this is bringing everybody together as a team, sometimes players helping other players, and it feels like everybody is truly working together to tell and build a scene rather than, okay, you pass, you fail, you like critically succeed, you critically fail. You tell a much better story, I think, with the skill challenges in DC20. So with that, I'm going to end my short rest. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or anything, you can add those in the comment section below. I will definitely answer all the comments. And until next time, I hope you keep rolling with us.